Well, hello, folks. We're in the middle of a series on commonly misunderstood passages, and today we're going to be looking at Luke chapter 6, verse 38, which I believe is a commonly misunderstood verse of Scripture. This is what it says: "Give, and it will be given to you. They will pour into your lap a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. For by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you in return." Now, as a young Christian, I heard this verse of Scripture quoted numerous times, dozens if not hundreds of times, and almost all of those times it was quoted right before the offering. The preacher was seeking to stir us up to give generously, and he was using this verse of Scripture to do it. Well, the question I have is that what Jesus had in mind? When he said, "Give and it will be given to you," was he thinking about money? Was he thinking about material things? Well, in order to decide what he meant, we really need to look at the context of the passage. Context rules. Context is king. Context is everything. And if we wrench a verse out of its context and just quote that verse, we can make it mean whatever we want it to mean. But what did it mean? What was Jesus trying to communicate? Well, let's look at the context. Verse 36 and 37, the two verses that come right before this one say this: "Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. And do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Pardon, and you will be pardoned." Did you notice that Jesus is talking about do this or don't do this, and you will receive this or you will not receive that in return? Exactly the same way that he says in verse 38, "Give, and it will be given to you." The previous verses, "Be merciful. Don't judge, and you won't be judged. Don't condemn, you will not be condemned. Pardon, and you will be pardoned. Give, and it will be given to you." So when Jesus was talking about giving, it looks pretty clearly like he was not talking about money, but he was talking about things like giving mercy, and mercy will be given to you. Give a non-judgmental attitude towards others, and you'll receive a non-judgmental attitude from others. Give pardon, and you will receive pardon. Those were all of the things that are mentioned in the context. And to make this even stronger, if you look at the parallel passage to Luke 6:38, the parallel passage is Matthew 7, verses 1 and 2. Both of them are included in the Sermon on the Mount. And in both of them, this very phrase is used: "By your standard of measure, it will be measured to you." So what does Matthew 7 verses 1 and 2 say? There it says, "Do not judge so that you will not be judged. For in the way you judge, you will be judged. And by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you." So Matthew 7 verse 1 and 2 is the parallel account in Matthew's version of the Sermon on the Mount to Luke's account in Luke 6 verse 38. And what is Matthew 7 verses 1 and 2 talking about? Not judging others. The very thing that Jesus was talking about right before Luke 6:38, not judging others. And to make this even a stronger argument, the verses right after Luke 6:38 are a parable that Jesus told in order to strongly exhort his followers, his disciples, not to have a judgmental spirit towards other people. This is what he says in Luke 6:39 to 42. There in the succeeding context, Jesus says that we should first take out the log that is in our own eye before we take out the speck that is in our brother's eye. In other words, don't judge your brother, judge yourself. Take the sin out of your own life. You've got a lot of sin, way more sin in your own life than you even imagine. Deal with that. And when you've gotten all that sin out of your life, okay, go ahead and address your brother and his sin. But first start with yourself. So the context before and the context after Luke 6:38 is about not judging your brother. Instead, giving him pardon, giving him mercy, giving him a non-judgmental spirit. So if we wrench Luke 6:38 out of its context, we can make it speak about money. But if we look at it in its context, there's not a word in all the context about money at all. Before you believe whatever the preacher says, you should take a look at what he says in its context. And if we do that, we'll realize that the old adage, A verse without a context is a pretext for error is very true. So we need to look at those verses in their context. May God help us all to be Bereans and examine these things daily to see whether they be so. May God richly bless your life.